Let me begin by saying that there were two different types of causes of that post-election violence of 2007. There were structural causes or long-standing issues that Kenyans had put under the carpet for a long time without addressing them. And this included questions to do with inequalities, imbalances in national development or regional development, with some regions feeling that they are excluded from the national development process, and other regions feeling that they have been bypassed by national development itself. Now, this triggered a sense of marginalization among those who are feeling that they have been excluded. At the same time, there were income inequalities, and we continue having income inequalities, the gap between the rich and the poor widening and continuing to widen, and youth unemployment, for instance, becoming part of that expression of these inequalities that we are talking about. But there were proximate causes as well that were fed by these structural causes. These included the electoral system itself that is flawed, the electoral system of first past the post, without any recourse to anything else. Once you lose everything. You spend your billions, and you lose everything at the same time. In addition to the flawed electoral system, there was also the question of institutional decay and people having very little or limited faith in the institutions of governance. The judiciary, for instance, where people would have gone to if they felt aggrieved or if they felt that the election has been lost in a very unfair manner. People did not have trust in these institutions. People did not have trust and confidence in the police. People did not have trust and confidence in the courts. And there was very limited or confidence in the civil service or the bureaucracy. People thought the bureaucracy was serving the interest of the incumbent president. The police were doing the same. People felt the judiciary served the interest of the incumbent president. So combined, structural and proximate factors, the feelings of marginalization, the feelings of exclusion, and a flawed electoral system combined actually to become a fuel that was very combustive, if one can say that. Let me begin by saying that political pluralism is not an end in itself. Political pluralism needs to be seen as a means to an end. It's a means to an inclusive society. It's a means to a society that is governed by social justice. It's a means to a society that is built on the foundation of equality and democratic principles in general. Political pluralism also lays the foundation for peaceful coexistence between and among different groups. And therefore, one may need to argue that when you look at the democratic reforms that we have been promoting over the years, they are geared towards promoting that particular aspiration, that particular aspiration of different groups living together, living in peace and coexisting in a very harmonious manner among themselves. And therefore, one need not say that political pluralism needs to be practiced as an end in itself. It is actually a means to a very important end. But there are instances when people tend to look at political pluralism as an end in itself. And once you have many political parties, once you have respect for diversity, you stop there. No, one has got to go a mile ahead and start saying, we are a diverse society. We need to see how best to coexist. We need to see how best to build a society built on social justice and democratic principles. Let me begin by saying that the Kenya National Dialogue and Reconciliation process, and a very important outcome in the process of having dialogue and having negotiations, it ended violence to begin with. That was the most immediate gain that we had from the dialogue process. But even most important is that the national dialogue process that we had laid a framework and a roadmap for having a new constitution. So for the first time, we had a new constitution made within a period of 2 years, whereas past attempts had taken over 20 years without a new constitution. So the dialogue process, the Kenya National Dialogue and Reconciliation process, and that important outcome, producing a new constitution, a very radical constitution, and a constitution that actually tries to show a roadmap to a better society. If a better society, perhaps one may want to argue, a society that is based on a very radical departure from what we have at present. So one may want to argue that yes, we have the violence at that particular time, but then all of a sudden, through the dialogue among Kenyans that took place through the KNDR process, we were able to chart a path for a new future, a future governed by a new constitution. Let me begin by saying that Kenya's Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission that was initiated through the national dialogue process after the post-election violence of 2007 was an important opportunity, but an opportunity that has been lost. It was an important opportunity because it provided a forum or a space through which Kenyans would talk about their historical experiences and grievances and articulate their grievances, at the same time look at ways of becoming a better society in the future. Unfortunately, our Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission seems to remain as such, a Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission that only collected data, that only collected information by which they wrote, through which they wrote a report that has already been presented. And that's all, full stop. I'm saying it has not been able to accomplish much more than writing a report, simply because the process of writing the report and even the process of collecting the information was politicized from the very beginning. It was politicized in the sense that the chairman of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission happened to be a subject of discussion, a subject of what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission itself would be looking at. But he decided not to recuse himself from the Truth and Justice Commission. Instead, he decided to fight for his stay as a chairman of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. By that, the Truth and Justice Commission that we had in the country started having diversionary politics, and they spent about 6 months talking about whether the chairman should step down or not. That was a wasted moment. That was a wasted opportunity. We have a report with recommendations that we don't know whether they will ever be attended to because people did not pay attention to what was happening. And let me also mention something else. Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commissions all over Africa are a phenomena that we have also got to pay attention to because they talk about our histories, collecting information about the past, talking about the history in order to talk about the present and build a better future. If there is no government that is keen to look at that particular history of grievances and forge a platform under which we can launch the future, then Truth and Justice and Reconciliation Commissions will remain as such, institutions for writing reports and writing reports only. We have got to think very carefully and ask ourselves, what is the best moment of presenting a report by the Truth and Justice and Reconciliation Commission? Under what conditions can recommendations of Truth and Justice and Reconciliation Commission be implemented? Because it's not every moment that is suitable for the Truth and Justice and Reconciliation Commission. Mind you, we are talking about moments that are emotional. We are talking about instances where families have lost their members. We are talking about instances where communities have lost a lot in terms of their well-being and in terms of a sense of humanity. That needs to be taken into account. When do you present the report and what do you do with the report? Let me begin by saying that Kenya's constitution is very radical and very supportive of pluralism in many ways. First of all, it recognizes that Kenya is a country comprising different groups. It underlines the need for every government, the present and the future, to always come with ways and means of having an inclusive government, respecting diversity, tolerating diversity, and building foundations under which different ethnic communities can live together as one particular group. If we were to talk about what needs to be done in the future in order to strengthen our pluralism, I would say that the first and the most important thing is to entrench a culture of democratic governance, so that at least the government that we are going to have, any government that comes in the future, is a government that is built on the principle of inclusiveness rather than exclusiveness. And the moment you have a government that is built on a foundation of inclusive governance, then you are actually promoting pluralism. And that's what we need to start thinking about, how to build an inclusive order, an inclusive society, an inclusive government. Let me begin by saying that constitutions, new constitutions, are a threat to status quo to begin with. And because they are a threat to status quo, the first threat to a new constitution is the status quo itself. Those people who have been benefiting from lack of rule of law, those people benefit from lack of inclusive politics, those people who benefit from lack of a culture of service, for instance, those people who build their own personal careers from self-interest and patronage are an important threat to a new constitution, especially if it's radical and charts a path for a better society. Those are the threats to Kenya's new constitution. And there are many, because it's a new constitution that talks about a radical departure. It's a new constitution that gives a roadmap on a new power and how power is going to be enjoyed, how power is going to be acquired, how power is going to be utilized. There are many losers in the process, because we are talking about doing away with bad habits, and there are people who benefit from bad habits. Those who benefit from the bad habits, of course, will not like a new constitution to see the end of the light of the day. Enrich a culture of democratic governance, but even more important, our own constitution, Article 10, seeks to do nothing else other than actually to build a foundation for a plural society. Article 10 talks about patriotism, the need for national unity, respect for diversity, respect for democratic governance, and promotion of people's participation in national development. That article alone stands a lot. If we implemented and adhered to the article on values and principles of governance, stands a better chance of building a better Kenya and a better plural society that we have. It's an article that really talks about human dignity, equality, social justice, and it seeks to actually anchor the values of pluralism in the society. So what we can do really is to ensure that we adhere to these particular values and principles of governance, because they are the cornerstone of a plural and stable Kenya.
Thank you. That's it. What's your profession?
I'm a political scientist.
You're a political scientist.
Yes.
Fascinating to be at that stage in the really at the birth. I mean,
yeah, I know it's
you're really at the moment.
It's a moment that I didn't know I would live to see. You know, to see we've been experimenting with every moment, trying to have a new constitution for over 20 years.
And to have it done in such a short period of time. I mean, it's wonderful.
If there was no violence, in 2008, we wouldn't be having a new constitution, because of one simple thing. In the past, any attempt to have a new constitution would go very far. Professor Yashgai was leading one particular attempt. And the moment you almost are able to, you are around getting one, status quo organizes and fights it very hard.
Oh, yeah.
Very hard. And once they fight and very hard, you drop the ball. Yeah. And that went on for many years. But because of violence and the formation of a new coalition government, which was balancing with powers being balanced very carefully, and a new roadmap, and the international community watching over what Kenya was doing, I think that saved us. Let me also mention that I was one of the people who was monitoring implementation of reforms. I was commissioned by the panel of eminent African personalities under Kofi Annan to be reporting quarterly on what the government was doing. What was fascinating is that we were producing reports every quarter to tell the Kenyan government that this is where you are, this is where you are, this is what is left to be done. And that put a lot of pressure on the government to do the right things right, and to do things in good time to show the world that actually Kenya was moving very fast. There is also another thing we need to remember, that Kenyans are very resilient. They fall and wake up and move very quickly, if one can say that. Because the post-election violence of 2008 was not a small issue. Many countries would not have survived that particular kind of crisis before getting into the brink and then getting down the cliff. But we have got this particular instance where the international community mobilized very quickly, Kenyans themselves mobilized very quickly and said we have to save a country. And saving that country required just on a coalition government based on the principles of power sharing. And then power sharing not as an end in itself, but to lay a foundation for strong reforms. And that on its own, one reform that they agreed to do was to have a new constitution with a very clear roadmap, with very clear benchmarks, that this particular distance need to be traveled, but a new constitution need to be produced in a period of 2 years. And sure indeed, they got it.